My name is Rabbi David Cohen, and until 3 months ago, I was the head rabbi of Temple Beth Israel in Jerusalem and a leading scholar in Kabbalah studies. What I'm about to share will be dismissed by many, rejected by most, and will likely end my 40-year career in Jewish leadership. But after what I experienced during the 17 minutes I was clinically dead this past Yom Kippur, I have no choice but to speak. I understand the gravity of what I'm about to share. For decades, I was known as the rabbi who wrote extensive rebuttals against missionary claims. My book, Why Jesus Cannot Be the Messiah, sold over 100,000 copies and was required reading in many yeshivas. I trained countless young rabbis in how to counter Christian interpretations of our prophecies. I was secure in my understanding of Torah, respected in my community, and certain of my beliefs. But everything changed on that fateful night in Jerusalem. Before I tell you about my encounter with the one we have rejected, and the terrifying message he gave me about what's coming in 2025, you need to understand something crucial. I am not mentally ill, I am not seeking attention, and I am not being paid by any Christian organization. In fact, sharing this testimony has cost me everything: my position, my marriage, my relationships, and my standing in the community I've served for 4 decades. What compels me to speak is the urgency of the message I received. Time is running out for our people. What I witnessed during those 17 minutes has shaken me to my core, and the signs I was shown are already beginning to unfold exactly as I was told they would. In the past 3 months since my experience, I've struggled with whether to share this publicly. But 2 weeks ago, I saw the first sign come to pass exactly as it was shown to me during my death experience. I can no longer remain silent. The lives of too many Jewish people hang in the balance. Some of you watching this may recognize me. Until recently, I appeared regularly on Israeli television as a religious commentator. I've lectured at Hebrew University, written for the Jerusalem Post, and served on the Chief Rabbinate Council. I'm not sharing these credentials to boast, but to establish that I am of sound mind and reputation. What happened during the Kol Nidre service this past Yom Kippur would change not only my life, but potentially the destiny of every Jewish person who hears this message. The evening of Yom Kippur began like any other in my 40 years of service. The synagogue was packed, every seat filled with familiar faces: doctors, lawyers, scholars, families I'd watched grow up over decades. The air was heavy with anticipation as the sun set over Jerusalem, marking the beginning of the holiest day in our calendar. I remember standing before the ark, wrapped in my tallit, preparing to begin the Kol Nidre prayer. The ancient melody that had passed through generations was about to leave my lips when something felt different. In that moment, I had a strange sensation, as if time itself had slowed down. The Hebrew letters in the prayer book before me seemed to rearrange themselves, forming words I'd never noticed before. That's when it happened. A searing pain shot through my chest, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Later, medical reports would show that my main arterial valve had completely ruptured, a widowmaker heart attack, they called it. But in that moment, all I knew was that something profound was occurring. I didn't collapse immediately. Instead, I gripped the podium, trying to maintain composure. I remember looking out at my congregation, seeing the concern growing on their faces. My son Benjamin, also a rabbi, was the first to notice something was wrong. I saw him starting to rise from his seat, but before he could reach me, everything changed. Suddenly, I was looking down at my own body. I watched as my physical form crumpled to the ground, the prayer shawl floating down like a white flag of surrender. The chaos that erupted in the synagogue seemed distant, as if I was watching it through thick glass. I saw my son reaching my lifeless body, heard the shouts for a doctor, witnessed the frantic calls to emergency services. But what happened next defies all rational explanation. The synagogue scene began to fade, and I found myself moving through what I can only describe as a tunnel of pure consciousness. As a scholar of Kabbalah, I had studied the mystical texts about death experiences for decades, but nothing had prepared me for this reality. The first thing that struck me was the language. Everything was in ancient Hebrew, not the modern Hebrew we speak in Israel, not even the biblical Hebrew I'd studied all my life, but something more pristine, more fundamental. It was as if I was experiencing language in its purest form, the way it existed before the confusion at Babel. As I moved through this dimension, I became aware of presences around me. These weren't the angels I had imagined in my theological studies. These were what our ancestors called the Watchers, beings of pure light and purpose. They seemed to be guiding me towards something, or someone. Then I heard it, a sound that shook my very essence. It was the sound of shofars, but not like any I had ever heard on Rosh Hashanah. These sounds carried within them all of history, all of truth, all of reality, and they were heralding something, or someone. I was about to encounter what would shatter every theological construct I had built my life upon. But before I tell you about my meeting with the one we have rejected for 2,000 years, you need to understand what the Watchers showed me first. The Watchers led me to what I can only describe as the Valley of Judgment, though these words fail to capture its true nature. Here, to my astonishment, I encountered faces I recognized from photographs and paintings spanning centuries of Jewish history. Great rabbis, scholars, and leaders of our people. But they were not as I expected to find them. The first to approach me was Rabbi Yitzhak Kaduri, whom I had met in Jerusalem before his death in 2006. Many may remember the controversy surrounding his death, when rumors circulated about a note he left regarding the Messiah. What he told me in this valley would confirm the truth about that note, but I'm getting ahead of myself. David, he said, using my Hebrew name. What we taught was incomplete. We were blind guides, leading others away from the truth that was right before us in our own scriptures. His words struck me like physical blows. Here was one of the most revered Kabbalists of the modern era, telling me our understanding had been wrong. Behind him, I saw faces I recognized from my years of study. Rabbi Schneerson, Rabbi Kanievsky, and others whose books line the shelves of yeshivas worldwide. They were in what appeared to be different states of awareness, some in deep anguish, others in what I can only describe as divine revelation. One of the most shocking moments came when I encountered my own grandfather, Rabbi Joseph Cohen, who had perished in Auschwitz. He had died maintaining his rejection of Yeshua as Messiah. Now, his eyes filled with tears as he spoke. We were wrong, David. The suffering of our people continues because we refuse to see what is written in our own Torah, our own prophets. He began to recite Isaiah 53 in Hebrew, but the words were different somehow, clearer, their true meaning unveiled. Each word seemed to illuminate the air around us, and I saw how we had deliberately misinterpreted this passage for generations. The suffering servant was no longer an allegory for Israel. The truth was undeniable here, where no theological gymnastics could obscure it. But what happened next shook me even more deeply. The valley began to fill with light, and all the souls around me fell to their knees. The Watchers who had guided me began to sing in that pure Hebrew I mentioned earlier. The sound was both beautiful and terrible. Beautiful in its purity, terrible in its power to expose every hidden thing in my heart. Through this light, a figure began to approach. I knew, with every fiber of my being, who it was, yet my mind fought against the recognition. Everything in my training, my learning, my life's work screamed in protest. But here, in this place where truth cannot be hidden, I could no longer deny what was right before me. The light that emanated from his presence was different from anything in creation, not like sunlight or artificial light, but rather truth itself made visible. As he approached, I saw what our prophet Daniel tried to describe. Hair white as pure wool, eyes like flames of fire. But what struck me most were the scars, the marks we inflicted, that our ancestors inflicted, still visible in his glorified form. I fell to my knees, just as Saul of Tarsus must have on the Damascus road. The weight of 2,000 years of rejection pressed down on me. Every argument I'd ever made against him, every book I'd written denying his claims, every student I'd taught to resist the truth, it all rose up before me like a mountain of shame. David, son of Joseph. He spoke my name in that pure Hebrew, and I understood why our ancestors were told not to pronounce the sacred name. His voice contained within it all authority, all love, all truth. You have been brought here because time grows short for my people Israel. Through tears, I managed to look up. His eyes held such love, love for me, love for our people, that it physically hurt to see it. How could we have been so blind? The prophecies of Zechariah flashed through my mind. They will look upon me whom they have pierced, and they will mourn for him, as one mourns for an only son. But he hadn't brought me here just to reveal himself. What he showed me next has compelled me to risk everything to share this message. 3 specific prophecies were revealed about what's coming to Israel, beginning in 2025. "Watch carefully," he said, "for these signs will come in rapid succession." The first vision he showed me centered on the Temple Mount. I saw events that I am now prohibited from fully describing, but I can say this. By late spring 2025, something will be discovered beneath the Temple Mount that will shake the foundations of both Judaism and Islam. This discovery will set in motion a chain of events that will appear to make peace possible, but it will be a false peace. The second prophecy revealed a deception so subtle, so convincing, that it will capture the hearts of our Jewish people worldwide. I saw a figure arise who will seem to fulfill every messianic prophecy we have longed to see fulfilled. He will perform signs and wonders that will convince even the most skeptical rabbis. But Yeshua showed me that this person will be the ultimate false Messiah, the one our sages warned about but misunderstood. The third prophecy. Here, I must pause, because what I saw was so terrifying that I've wept every night since my return. It involves a choice every Jewish person will have to make by the end of 2025, a choice that will determine not just their earthly fate, but their eternal destiny. The third prophecy revealed a technological advancement that will be introduced as a blessing but will become a snare for our people. I saw a system, appearing first in Israel, that would combine our medical records, banking, and religious practices into what they called a digital Jewish identity. It seemed beneficial at first, a way to streamline everything from synagogue attendance to receiving medical care. But Yeshua showed me the true purpose behind this system. By late 2025, it will become mandatory for all Jews, first in Israel and then worldwide. Those who refuse it will be labeled as non-compliant and gradually excluded from Jewish community life. The system will be promoted by respected rabbis and Israeli leaders as a way to preserve Jewish identity in the modern age. "Tell them," Yeshua commanded, his voice filled with urgent love, "that accepting this mark will seal their fate. Many will choose it to maintain their place in the community, to keep their positions, to preserve their wealth, but it will cut them off from the salvation I offer." He then showed me 3 specific events that will occur before this system is implemented, signs that will validate this warning. First, a prominent rabbi in Jerusalem will announce a revolutionary discovery about the Messiah in the Torah codes. This will happen within months of this video's release, but the discovery will be twisted to point toward the false Messiah rather than the true one. Second, a peace agreement will be proposed that seems to solve the Temple Mount dispute. It will be hailed as miraculous, and many will say that messianic times have arrived. But Yeshua showed me that this peace will be a deception, lasting only months before giving way to unprecedented conflict. Third, and this was perhaps the most specific sign, a series of supernatural events will occur at the Western Wall, causing many Orthodox Jews to believe that the time of redemption has arrived. I saw crowds gathering, witnessing what they believed to be divine manifestations. But these signs will be counterfeit, designed to prepare our people to accept the false Messiah. "Your people," Yeshua said, his voice heavy with sorrow, "have been preserved through centuries of persecution because I have protected them. But now they face their greatest test. Many will choose comfort and acceptance over truth. Only those who remember the true prophecies will recognize the deception." He then showed me something that broke my heart. Scenes of Jewish families being torn apart as some recognized the truth while others embraced the deception. I saw respected rabbis leading their congregations toward destruction, truly believing they were serving Hashem. But in the midst of this darkness, I also saw hope. Small groups of Jews, meeting in homes, studying the Torah and prophets with newly opened eyes. I saw young people particularly, beginning to question the traditional rejections of Yeshua. They were discovering him in the Tanakh, in passages we had explained away for centuries. Suddenly, the visions ceased, and Yeshua gave me one final message, words I was commanded to share specifically with our people. Tell them that I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have never forgotten my covenant with Israel. But just as Egypt had one night to choose between life and death during the first Passover, so now my people will have a short time to choose. The blood on the doorpost is now my blood, and the time of decision is at hand. Then came the return, a journey back that felt like being pulled through every dimension at once. I heard the shofars again, but this time they seemed to be sounding an alarm, a final warning. The watchers who had guided me spoke one last time, in that pure Hebrew. Return and tell them. Your silence will be counted as agreement with darkness. I became aware of voices, urgent medical voices. Clear! Someone shouted. My physical body convulsed as electricity coursed through it. The pain was extraordinary as my spirit reconnected with flesh. My eyes opened to see the paramedics leaning over me, their faces showing surprise at my sudden revival. He's back! One shouted in Hebrew. Neshima Tova! Good breath. I had been dead for 17 minutes. By all medical understanding, even if I had survived, I should have had severe brain damage. But not only was my mind clear, it was clearer than it had ever been. The veil that Paul wrote about, the one that covers our people's eyes when reading the Torah, had been lifted from my vision. The days that followed were difficult. How do you return to normal life after such an experience? How do you face your congregation, your colleagues, your family, knowing that everything you've taught them for decades was incomplete at best, deceptive at worst? My wife of 30 years left when I tried to tell her what I'd experienced. My children won't speak to me. The synagogue board asked for my resignation. My books have been removed from yeshiva libraries. Former friends cross the street to avoid me. But none of that matters now. What matters is that you, my Jewish brothers and sisters watching this, understand the urgency of this message. The signs I was shown are already beginning to appear. Just last week, the first sign I mentioned was reported in the Jerusalem Post, though few recognized its significance. You don't have to believe my experience, but I beg you to do one thing. Start reading our scriptures again, but this time without the traditional interpretations. Read Isaiah 53 as if you've never read it before. Look at Daniel's timeline with fresh eyes. Study the prophecies about the Messiah and ask yourself honestly, who has fulfilled them? Time is running out. The choice you make in the coming months will affect not just your earthly life, but your eternal destiny. Don't let pride, tradition, or fear of rejection keep you from investigating these truths for yourself. For those watching who feel the Spirit of God stirring in your heart, I want to share 3 specific things you must do immediately. First, get a copy of the Tanakh, not the Talmud, not the commentaries, but the pure Word of God. Read it alone, away from the influences of others. Focus especially on Isaiah chapters 52 and 53, Daniel chapter 9, and Zechariah chapter 12. As you read, pray this simple prayer: God of Abraham, show me the truth about Yeshua, even if it costs me everything. Second, begin documenting the signs I've mentioned. When you see news about the Temple Mount discovery in the coming months, when you hear about the rabbi's Torah code revelation, when you witness the supernatural events at the Western Wall, remember this warning. These events will seem miraculous, but they are markers of the deception to come. Third, and most importantly, you must make your decision before the digital Jewish identity system is implemented. Once it begins, the pressure to conform will be enormous. They will say you cannot be a true Jew without it. They will restrict access to the Western Wall, to synagogues, even to kosher food markets for those who don't comply. But remember what I was shown. Accepting this system will mark a spiritual point of no return. I know how difficult this message is to hear. I know the cost of accepting it. Believe me, I'm living that cost every day. But consider this. Why would I sacrifice everything? My reputation, my family relationships, my life's work, to share a lie? What could I possibly gain from this? For those who want to know more, I've established a secure contact method. The information is in the description below. But please, do not delay. The time frame I was shown is specific and short. By the end of 2025, every Jew will have made their choice, whether they realize it or not. Wiping tears from my eyes. My dear Jewish brothers and sisters, we have been preserved through centuries of persecution, through pogroms, through the Holocaust, through wars and terrorism. We survived because the God of our fathers protected us, waiting for this very moment in history. But our greatest test lies just ahead. Remember the words of Moses, "I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live." Today, that choice is before us again. Yeshua, our true Messiah, is calling his people home. The time of Jacob's trouble is approaching, but so is the greatest awakening in Jewish history. Which side of this divide you find yourself on will depend on one thing: your willingness to question everything you've been taught and seek the truth for yourself. May the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob open your eyes as he opened mine. May you have the courage to seek truth regardless of the cost. And may you choose life before the time runs out. This is Rabbi David Cohen, and this will likely be my final public message. Remember what you've heard today. The signs are coming. Time is short. Choose wisely.